I want to talk about the DNC convention in somewhat of a slightly different way than my previous video. The video started off with the intention of actually going through the various speakers at the conference, and it ended up being something dramatically different. But I do want to take a moment to point something out. In John Kasich, Republican, anti-choice Republican, union-busting Republican, former governor of Ohio, John Kasich, who was given a spot to speak, and apparently additional Republicans were added to that slot. It was big news that AOC only got 60 seconds to give her statement. Honestly, she should have turned it down at that point, but she did her job as a Democrat. Kasich spent about as much time as AOC got in her entire speech, I'm embellishing a bit, to go after AOC. Now, think about that for the moment. I want to talk about what that means in real terms from the standpoint of the way the Democratic Party is thinking about this and the Biden campaign is thinking about this. And I want to talk about it and how they're thinking about it in regards to strategy. But I also want to talk about what it means. Those are two different things. Our interests are not in alignment. So what one person wants and what one person wants to try to get out of that does not necessarily mean it is in the best interest of the other party that is joined to the hip of that first party. Think of, France, Britain in World War II, where France gets overrun, and France is like, hey, you're going to get our guys out there with yours? Yeah, sure. That's exactly what we're going to do. Brits get their guys out, get the fuck out of Dodge. I'm making the point that the lefties are the battered wives of the political spectrum, and they have associated themselves with the Democratic Party for 40, 50 years or more. And in this relationship, there's an unequal distribution of not just power, but concern, attention, and even deference towards, despite the fact that this is a necessary component for the party to ever win. And yet, if you're looking at what's taking place at the convention, just from a large optic standpoint, there are a lot of Republicans, barely any lefties, and she gets 60 minutes or 60 seconds. Bernie Sanders gets his speech, but none of these people are basically talking about policy, and the Republicans are giving signal that the Democratic Party is not going to move to the left. What does it mean? I want to go into that because I think that gets into really interesting spots in regards to politics, the way Joe Biden has chosen to basically run this race, not just with this choice, but also with the choice of Kamala Harris. And I want to talk about it for a moment, just from the standpoint of the left. I will give you what I think is objectively true, and I will give you what I think it means. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Just as a community announcement, we're going to try to get back to normal in regards to the contributor appreciation specials. I mentioned this once before, but just in case somebody might have missed it, I had to have surgery a couple of weeks ago, and it didn't do exactly what it needed to do. And so there's going to have to be an update for it. But just in the healing process, it's taken a while for things to kind of get back to normal and for things to stop hurting. And so we're going to try to get back to the contributor appreciation specials and get back to the kind of normal uptick in shows that was there prior as the weeks go on. Hopefully Monday, but at the worst, at the very least next Monday, especially if the procedure takes place within the next week. All right, so now that the updates for show updates are going on, John Kasich. Let's start here first. What's objectively true? The majority of the public agrees with Medicare for all to the tune, I think, 70%. And I think it's like 88% Democrats. The majority of the public agrees with elimination of student debt and making colleges or public colleges and universities free. The majority of the public agrees with an expansion of Social Security. A majority of the public agrees with wealth tax and increases taxes on the wealthy. Numbers exactly on the notion of the $15 minimum wage, but I strongly suspect it would be agreed upon. These things, if the majority of the public say, yeah, we agree with those things, we can back those things. If a candidate ran, the majority of us would vote for that guy because we think that this is what our country needs right now in the moment. At normal times, you would get agreement on those things. At abnormal times, when you are in the midst of multiple crises, where you have millions of people unemployed, millions of people not being able to pay their rent, millions of people not even able to feed themselves, and millions of people infected and dead, infected, but hundreds of thousands dead from a virus that has hit this nation, but that we have given all sorts of deference to dealing with the wealth of the nation as opposed to dealing with the people of the nation themselves. These are not radical positions. If you get a large majority of people who say, yes, we like that, then the position, by definition, is not radical. If you get a group of wealthy people who represent the 1% or the 0.1% of the nation, and that 0.1% sit in a room and they say, you know what, we don't like those policies because those policies directly interrupt us either being able to get people to give us money politically or my own business entanglements. Or for that matter, I just may even disagree with them from a political standpoint because I am on the right to this stuff. I have a ton of money. Why wouldn't I be to the right? It's in my best interest to be so. And you have one or two people who say, well, wait a minute. No, we do agree with those policies. And the news people come out and say, well, based on the distribution of this 0.1% of people, that guy is a radical and that guy is something else. Or that guy's a radical on the other side. But the centrist here is the one that doesn't believe in any of those policies, but believe that people shouldn't die on the street without, Social Security. That's not centrist. The centrist position is the one that I just espoused, that the majority of the American public accepts. You're taking basically a position of the wealth of this nation and going through and giving them the political deference of what's defined as being some kind of political spectrum. The reality is, do you agree with the policy or not? And if you agree with the policy and the policy ameliorates some position and the public says, yes, let's try that, this is what we want to do, then that position by definition is not radical. When AOC espouses those ideas are not radical. Now, she may say other things that you may disagree with and everything else, but I'm just making the very basic point that from a basic guideline in regards to what the public would support, what the Democratic Party overwhelmingly supports, talking about people, she's on space. If you ask the people who did they want to see at this, they said AOC. Instead, you get John Kasich, an anti-choice, union-busting Republican, speaking on a Democratic stage, taking time to go after AOC. John Kasich couldn't even get to his own primary. What's true in all of this is that the Democratic Party is making a pitch to Republicans. Here's one part of Kasich, but Kasich says something else after he says this.
I'm sure there are Republicans and independents who couldn't imagine. I'm sure there are Republicans and independents who couldn't imagine crossing over to support a Democrat. They fear Joe may turn sharp left and leave them behind. I don't believe that because I know the measure of the man. It's reasonable, faithful, respectful. And no one pushes Joe around. Joe Biden is a man for our times that call for all of us to take off our partisan hats and put our nation first for ourselves and, of course, for our children.
Just so we're clear, not accepting Medicare for all, not accepting a Green New Deal, those are partisan positions as a flat fact. If I'm saying that 88% of people support Medicare for all, and I'm saying the overwhelming majority of the public backs a position that I support, you may say that's a partisan position. It is. It is a policy that I want to implement. If you say you don't agree with that and you want a public option or something, or to enhance Obamacare, which is all you're going to get out of this, that's a partisan position also. It is even more partisan when you consider that the overwhelming majority of the support is behind me. You're taking a radical centrist or radical partisan position and not backing a policy that the overwhelming majority of the public support. You put this man on your stage to basically say, fuck the left, and that have no fear, Joe Biden isn't going to move to the left. Now, understand why this took place. What's true? The Democratic Party wants to make gains with Republicans and people who they believe that Trump abandoned, or that got abandoned or felt abandoned by Donald Trump. The Reagan Democrats of sorts. What is also true is that in the same way that when Donald Trump attacked Joe Biden on this notion that he's going to be soft on crime, that he's going to defund the police and abolish police departments and your world is going to look like X or Y, what did Joe Biden do? He chose Kamala Harris. Part and parcel, he could sell her as if she was black. But in addition to being able to sell her as if she was black, he also has the fact that she was a top cop. And as that top cop, you can find videos where her laughing at people who had difficulty keeping their kids in school because they were homeless, or locking up stoners and putting them in cages, or keeping people in death row despite the judge. You can find all of this stuff. So the notion that Joe Biden is going to be soft on crime, Joe Biden was the architect of the very system that these people are out there protesting now. And on top of that, you can find videos where Joe Biden is taunting Ronald Reagan to execute more people. So this notion that you're going to say this guy's going to abolish the police, he got himself a tough on crime ticket with Kamala Harris. She's somewhat black. I can sell her like that. And on top of being able to sell her like that and appease the African-American community to leave me alone about this taking advantage of you stuff, I put that woman in, so, shut up about that. On top of that part, she's a top cop. If you're going to argue that he's going to defund the police, that's kind of a weird argument considering Joe Biden set up the laws that we have now and chose a top cop for the job. This is no different. In way of bringing these Republicans on, and you have all of these people who basically come out, Donald Trump's attack is that Joe Biden was going to run far to the left, and that Bernie Sanders and AOC was controlling Joe Biden like he was an animatronic robot. Why do you think Kasich said that? Listen to what he said. Nobody pushes Joe around. Why do you think he said that? What do you think he said that?
The measure of the man is reasonable, faithful, respectful. And no one pushes Joe around.
He says that because Donald Trump has been attacking Joe Biden, saying that Joe Biden is being controlled by AOC and Joe Biden and running this radical left nonsense. These are the attacks that they've been leveling at Joe Biden. Okay, fine. So what does Joe Biden do? He doesn't want to necessarily unbalance the equation. So he goes and he gets a bunch of Republicans to come out and says, hey, Joe Biden is really a right winger. And he is not going to appease the group of the left at all. Look at who he put up to speak. Look at all the Republicans that he has here. Joe Biden is, what we consider a centrist. What we need right now in this moment is radical centrism, ignoring the fact that that's what you've had for the past 50 years. And the belief that is infinitely necessary in order to even say that and come up here and put these people on the stage is that the entire world fell off its axis with Donald Trump getting in office. And that self-serving attitude is just not true. Joe Biden doesn't want to balance the equation. These Republicans are there in order to mitigate any level of people that may come away with the perception that Joe Biden is going to run to the left, including lefties. Now, this means that he is in no way trying to make an affirmative case. He's not trying to come out and do anything with a certain degree of bravo. He understands that the majority of the people who are voting for him are doing so entirely because he is not Trump. He understands that this vote for him and for all of these other people has nothing to do with policy, that people have basically given that up and have just said, we'll take whatever. If it was a ham sandwich, the ham sandwich would get my vote. It'd be President Ham Sandwich. I just need to get Donald Trump out of office. And that's what those people have basically been broken into form to do. That's what's taking place here. And so Joe Biden understands what's going on. So he doesn't necessarily have to do anything like that. He just wants to keep it balanced. If Donald Trump attacks him one way, he finds a way to blunt it. He attacks him another way, he finds a way to blunt it. And in this way, you can shadow and keep par with your opponent without necessarily doing anything that's overt where you might get undermined or get attacked for. There's something else I want to show. Kasich says this right here. He's at a Democratic convention now. People on the extreme, whether they're on the left or on the right, they get outsized publicity that tend to define the party. I listen to people all the time make these statements, and because AOC gets outsized publicity doesn't mean that it represents the Democratic Party. She's just some member of it, and it's on both sides, whether it's Republicans or whether it's Democrats. That's true. AOC clearly does not represent the leaders of the party. AOC and her policies clearly does not represent what the Democratic Party wants, what the Democratic Party strives for, or, for that matter, what they even want to achieve. Whatever the lip service that they give you is one thing. Whatever the people that they will try out to be representatives of them in any particular moment is one thing. If they need to stop Sanders, then yeah, they're going to sound a little bit more lefty. Once they get rid of Sanders, they're going to go back to the old playbook, because at that point, you're stuck with whoever you got. You got nowhere else to go. And Joe Biden will tell you, go vote for the other guy. They're showing you these Republicans, and they're showing you the position of the left, because in their heads, that's all it needs to be. If you're on the left, from their standpoint, for the last 50 years, you've decided to vote for somebody entirely for who they weren't. Meaning any notion of an affirmative vote or an objective vote of saying this is what we represent, and we are not willing to accept this other nonsense that you guys are going as you go to the right. There needs to be accountability in politics, and without any level of accountability, you're going to have what you got. Ineffective political actors who basically don't support the policies that you, the majority of the public, support. And if they're not representing the public in a representative government, who are they representing? And when the media is calling people extreme, that has a point of view that is basically in line with the American public, then what the hell is wrong with the media? And is it not that it's not the person policies that are extreme, it's an out-of-touch media and political space that have long since lost track of what the public wants, what the public needs, and even more appalling, doesn't even care. They're giving you a perspective of what the 1% wants. And they're giving you the extremes within the context of the 1%. When the reality of it is, if you're talking to people in the public and everything else, no, those policies aren't extreme. The radical centrists, as you would call them, are the ones that are pushing stuff that the public has found wanting, that you've had for the last 50 years. And making this argument that, no, we need something else. Something fundamentally needs to change. Something fundamentally needs to be different. And you're offered Joe Biden and said, look, you accept him or you're going to keep Trump. Make your choice. Do you want to go vote for the other guy? It's, again, you have nowhere else to go stuff. The only correct out for that is to stand under the guidelines of policy of what you're willing and not willing to accept. And unfortunately, people get into their mind that what they consider ethics get in the way. And it's manipulated ethics, if it's that. The argument will be this guy's incrementally less worse. All of those policies that you want are great, but don't be a purist on that stuff. Missing the point that those policies are favored by the American public, and the people who are being the purists are the people who are representing those policies. They decide we're going to represent the rich, we're going to represent the people who give us the cash, and if you don't back us, then a Republican, that goblin wins. And they would say that because of such, we're incrementally less worse, and as such, the pragmatic choice is to vote for us. The problem is this narrow-focused pragmatism. When you look at it over the course of 40, 50 years, you get to see that your political space has fled to the right and has taken godly sums of cash. And your political parties are closer in alignment than you might have thought. Not just that every time the Democratic Party moved to the right, the Republican Party did also. You basically had one party just fleeing to the right. With Democrats making arguments, you have nowhere else to go, least worse, blue no matter who, and any level of accountability is drained out of the political space. And then someday you look up when you actually need these guys to do a job, and they're seat fillers. They weren't put in for any kind of affirmative case. We lazily voted out of fear and cowardice for these random people, when the honest-to-God way of doing politics would have been far, far better, even if you would have lost some Democratic seats. Part and parcel to the problem is the identification of an individual as a Democrat, or for the matter, a Republican. I represent these policies, and there are certain lines that I'm willing to accept and certain lines I'm willing not to. If you're telling me you're building a concentration camp, I don't care what party you're going for. I'm not voting for that. If there's some policy that I may agree with that I think we need, but I'm fudging on it, then fair enough. But I'm making the point that there should not be something where you're willing to accept pretty much anything out of relative distance to whatever the party is, where you, objectively, in regards to your belief system, it's just nothing. What are the things that you believe in? What are the things that you believe in as a Democrat, for that matter? And what part of those things are you willing to sell away in order to accept anything? And if you are willing to sell away in order to accept anything, at which point do you ever get your world to change into something better? Meaning, if you get 88% of your group saying we want Medicare for all and your party is telling you to kick rocks, who are they representing? And how do you ever even get your policy accomplished if in this particular moment, just before an election, you have 30, 20 million people without health care and they're still telling you no? When do you ever get what you want? I'm saying it never happens under that model, and that your model of politics is fundamentally broken. You should react to politics as if you were in a union working against the corporation. And the moment that Bernie Sanders lost, every last group that was on the left should have came in unison of saying, this is what we accept or we won't. And if the Democratic Party did not want to back a people's agenda and they decided to lose, the fault is of the Democratic Party, and every last one of those groups should have been screaming it to the hilt. That's politics. That's negotiation. That's interaction between two parties. This complicit, sad state where policy is an afterthought and Donald Trump is the devil and everything was going great until Donald Trump stepped on the political scene, as if the reason that Donald Trump got elected in the first place had nothing to do with this centrism that apparently that the public is screaming for at this moment. No, we're at a sad political inflection point, and cowardice is not the way to go about it. I don't care if Satan himself materialized and ended up on the other side of the dispatch box. If the Democratic Party is so partisan and is so rigid that they are not willing to accept policy that has 88% support, 70% support, 60-something% support, meaning a public mandate, and instead of stopping what they are calling the apocalypse, they are willing to rigidly not accept those policies and instead tank the country, knowingly doing so. They understood that those millions of people weren't going to vote for them if they didn't back Medicare for all. They were too rigid in their ideology and belief system to back policies that would have unified the country organically and won the race. Instead, they slapped every lefty that they could find. They chased after Republicans, and they ran the race as if they just assumed that lefties really did, almost cosmically, had nowhere else to go, and that they would never grow a spine, never grow a backbone, never actually back policy, and never actually be vicious. And their pushback on any notion that they somehow responsible for a party to which they don't belong. Until politics gets there, nothing changes. They basically slapped the person who represented the up-and-coming generation of the Democratic Party that represented the majority of belief set of Democrats. I'm not talking about the one percenters. I'm talking about just regular people all throughout the United States that consider themselves Democrats. And many, by the way, independents. You slapped her live on the DNC stage, and you let a Republican do it, and you stood by and just watched as if it wasn't necessarily a big deal. Whatever you want to call it, it is a big deal. And it is absolutely indicative of how they perceive and engage you and how they just assume that you would support them despite the fact that they're engaging you in these ways. It's a slap. Your question becomes, what do you do about it if you do anything about it? And basically you turn around and you go make that vote anyway. My point is, the assumption is you will just turn around and make that vote anyway. That you won't necessarily be overly bothered by them giving AOC, a person who's up and coming member, the representative of the party in some way to many people, especially if you're talking about policy. No, the elites within the context of that party don't care. They believe they have you over a barrel. They think they have 40, 50 years of experience, and they're probably right. Policy is second nature at this point. And just understand the moment that you're in with more crises, the Great Depression. And their argument is the world was going great until Trump took office, and we just need to get back to some radical, sweet radical centrism. Bad policy from people who want to call themselves quote unquote moderate, which just means you don't have the balls to take a position that is actually in the best interest of the American public. These terms, these things they hide behind. Either a policy works or doesn't. Either it's a good idea or it's not. And in this very specific case, a 0.1% view does not make something moderate in compared to what the majority of the population wants and is screaming for. And the fact that the Democratic Party is perfectly willing to go after somebody who's an up-and-comer in that party that is beloved by a large part of that party tells you everything about the Democratic Party and the way they regard the left. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all. I'll be back in a few. Pop reality. Ilhan taking corporate money from Pelosi The Justice Democrats, let's see, the Justice Democrats, oh, this model is wrong for Bernie, said for years that change must come from the outside. People Party can bring that new. I hope so. I honestly, man, I've had Nick Brown on the show before, and we've had this conversation about the People's Party and trying to breed all these parties together. 1,000% agree with him. 1,000%. I would love to come on this platform and be enthusiastic in supporting a particular candidate. I would love to have this thing of hope in me that says, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be able to change this nation, by definition, change the world. So I would love to be that guy. But that's not our world. I mean, honestly, do you really think Joe Biden is the person for this moment in time, where you have all of these things that are taking place? If you look back from a historical context, you're talking about an FDR type figure, and I promise to God, Joe Biden is not that figure. That man was a liar back in the 80s, meaning you can't even believe anything that he says as he's going in. What is going to happen is any of the stuff that he tells you he's going to do, they're going to walk it back big time, and he's going to govern as he wants to govern. And in 4 years, he's going to explain to you how he did everything he could. The Republicans pushed back on him, and he was an awesome progressive president. And they're going to say, you have nowhere else to go. Ted Cruz is a monster, and you can't allow Joe Biden to do X. I mean, you can't allow him to do X or Y, so you got to vote for Joe Biden. And in 4 years, it's going to be the same. In 4 years, it's going to be the same. How do I know this? Because that's how it's been for the last 40. Nothing will change. If you want something to change in your political space, you have to act differently. Don't follow Cedar, follow MLK. If this truly is a revolution, revolutionaries like MLK, Lure specifically said, don't give your vote, they should be earned. Yes, your vote should be earned. Look, Cedar is a political actor. I mean, I suppose all of us are to some degree, but he works in coordination with the Democratic Party. And so the only answer that Cedar would ever come up with would be Joe Biden, Kamala Harris. I'm not saying that if Sanders had won, that he wouldn't be back in Sanders. Yes, he would be back in Sanders. I would wager that he would love to be back in Sanders right now. But from his framing of the world, I would imagine he's probably doing okay. And this time period, this weird locking mechanism that people are stuck in, he would perpetrate it or perpetuate it. And he would just, you got to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. You got to vote for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And if you got to make the point like, dude, somebody made this argument to him about a concentration camp. He basically, no, I'd vote for concentration camps if it was one less. And that's kind of the problem. For year to year, every 4 years, you keep moving on. And the same arguments are made as to why you must vote for a Democrat. This narrow focus pragmatism. Missing the point that the one concentration you voted for now, in 20 years, that Democrat is now pushing for 5 concentration camps. And you still may come and say, well, look, it's one concentration camp less. But yeah, you've expanded the playing field on a number of concentration camps. And those Democrats that you were voting for have just instantiated those camps as something that is normal and regular within the context of your society. I'm making a point to you that you normalize certain behaviors. Elections have things that you give away that goes beyond just the vote total itself. There are times where your party has to lose. There are times where your party gets to the point where it is doing things that goes beyond any notion of what you are. And for people to make the argument that you got to vote for the party anyway removes any notion of accountability from that process. It makes you just as culpable for the crappiness, the move to the right of that party as the party itself. There are times where your party needs to lose. Now, you can make an argument that this is not necessarily that time. Fair enough. I don't necessarily vote or shame people. But I do think that fear, that cowardice, plays heavily into this notion of what you expect from the people you're engaging. If you are one of those people in the upper echelon of the Democratic Party, if you lose, so what? Now, I don't think for a moment that political candidates want to lose. I do think that from the standpoint of political tactics, of groups that are interacting with one another, and this kind of interregnum, this kind of determination of who's going to be in charge and who's going to be in power, I do think those contests play themselves on these grand scales. If a group takes a position that we want X, we represent X, and the Democratic Party says, a small contingent of it, yeah, we don't like those things. We don't need those things. Nancy Pelosi has $100 million in the bank. I don't necessarily need Medicare for all. I don't need college. My kid is not going to need that. I can cover all of this stuff. And the millionaires and billionaires that are in Congress can do the same. So can the people who are giving them cash to help them in their ideologies to not agree with those particular items. You have another faction that may say, well, fine, you don't get our votes because you're not representing our interests. And this notion that you can represent the owner class and the worker class at the exact same time is nonsense. We need a party that represents our interests. You're not it. Now, if it became clear that those lefties were not in line, that they were going to lose that vote, you have one or two options. You tempt fate. You make the point of saying, well, no, we're not going to take this chance of putting through a precedent where we had to give in. And so even if some of us might have thought, yeah, that might be the best option to stop Trump because you can organically bring together the party with all of these ideas that these people like, meaning that's 15% of people, let's say 8% of people who weren't going to vote for you that all of a sudden can bear the vote. But you also may turn around and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to set the precedent that they think they can get something out of this. And when Trump wins again and he's a monster, we're going to make this argument that it's your fault that we lost, not that we had anything to do with it. We told you what the upper echelon wanted. You chose not to accept it. So now you got to deal with Trump. Meaning, from a class standpoint, their lot is not in any way hurt by this. From a class standpoint, yours is. And therein lies the stick. From the standpoint of the left, however, the catch becomes, does the Democratic Party care enough about public interests and about public representation that they would acquiesce and accept the fact that 10, 15 million people wouldn't vote for them and acquiesce on policy in order to stop Trump? Or do they tempt fate once again and say, we don't believe they're going to do it twice, and run with it? It's probably they're going to tempt fate and run with it. Now, the catch becomes, are you okay with A, being subordinate in this way, where you are stuck under this kind of thumb of a particular party that is willing to just run roughshod and let it all burn if it means that you're going to try to push up some resistance in regards to what you want and regards to what the public wants? We'll let it torch. And are you okay with that? And if you're not okay with that particular arrangement, what do you do about it? Not just what do you do about it, how do you break that particular bind that you find yourself in? That you have a political party that is so fervently not willing to represent your interests that they are willing to tank it all in order to stop you from getting what you want regarding policy, even if that policy has unanimous support. That's something you need to engage. Is that something you like? Is that something you're okay with? Why are you okay with having a party that doesn't represent your interests and basically threatens you with the other party in order to get you to fall in line? How do you ever get what you want in a party system like that, where basically what you want matters basically nothing? What it boils down to is the leverage that they have over you, which is the Republican Party. How does that ever change? You have 88% support from the standpoint of Medicare for all, and you still can't get it over the finish line. All of these people who are in this upper echelon tells you kick rocks. And one of the main people who are pushing it, AOC, just like Sanders. I don't even know if Sanders even said the word Medicare for all the entire night. And yet, it is the policy that the overwhelming majority of the public supports. And the Democrats would tell you to kick rocks. It's a slap in the face, and it tells you exactly what they think of you, what they think of the left, what they think of what you're willing to do, meaning from the standpoint of taking an actual political position that deviates from these clowns, and who they are actively trying to get, and what that means from the context of policy that these guys are going to push when they get in office. You have to reconcile that. Now, you already know that Medicare for all was my litmus test. That litmus test would not be fulfilled. Ergo, Joe Biden would not get my vote. And until millions get to that position, you will not get a policy that the overwhelming majority of the public support. That blows my mind. Because basically, the Democratic Party and Joe Biden has to justify, if this many people within the party supports this policy, how do you justify not supporting that policy if it will bring together the party organically and stop a man who you've been calling the walking apocalypse? That's the question that they need to answer that no one ever asks, because the media and the political space all basically function within a bubble of a class. And those people within the context of that class don't have the same issues as us, even though they're presenting information and opinion to us. that needs to change, that needs to be broken. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. I just want to make sure I haven't missed anyone. And do this, priest. November entry, one leftover. November's entry is one leftover diarrhea and dumping and two heaping poo sandwich. Yeah, it's poo, but at least it comes out with toast. Yeah. That's our election. That's our election. Sadly, the weak and the soft left are going to waste another 4 years on the Democratic Party backing AOC in 2024. It's either going to be rigged against her or she will be the new Obama. That's interesting. So I don't think she'll be the new Obama. I don't necessarily buy that one. Yeah, I don't think she's the new Obama. I think she's earnest in what she's trying to accomplish in her policy objectives. She is young, and everybody who's getting accustomed to a particular culture can be swayed or pulled in a particular direction. And I would imagine there's all sorts of pressure that will be put against her. But if she stays with this notion that, look, in order for me to get what I want to accomplish, I need to get some of these people out of here. I think that in some way protects the mind in regards to what you want to get accomplished. And you can judge her by her actions as she goes through for the next X number of years. I don't trust Joe Biden as far as I can throw Joe Biden. I don't trust Kamala Harris for as far as I can throw Kamala Harris. If more people took that attitude, because I want people to understand right now, all of those policies that Sanders were espousing, now all of you guys said, yes, we agree with. And then you said, well, we don't know if he's more electable. And put him into this moment right now. Do you honestly believe that this contest will be any different in regards to the way the contest is being outlaid? The public who says we want to get rid of Trump would have accepted Sanders. You may have some Democrats that wouldn't, that's fair enough, but the number of independents, Hispanics, all of these other groups, African Americans would have voted for Sanders in the same measure they would have voted for Joe Biden, because the reasons they're voting for Joe Biden now basically would be the same reasons they would be voting for Sanders. Meaning you could have had what you wanted in the political space. Those things could have been materialized, at the very least a general severe fight for those things. And yet you chose Joe Biden. And the only thing Joe Biden wants is to keep a balanced position in order for him to coast and stumble into office. It is unfortunate. And, I think Shane said he was more hopeful about this stuff. Honestly, I am not. Because I don't necessarily have this view that, reality necessarily is forced to produce those things. And just because, the arc of justice is long, well, it can be very, very long in regards to the night that people have to deal with before something comes that's a glimmer. FDR was a quirk. It wasn't the norm. And I know he put a stamp in this country that goes back for a generation. Part of the fear that was in Democrats, especially thoroughway Democrats, is that Sanders winning would have done the exact same thing. And that who they are would pale in comparison to who he is. And the standard that gets created is there with him and those policies. They're terrified of that because it basically undermines and makes who they are fundamentally redundant. If you have this guy here who seems to be earnest and genuine and actually pushing for these policies, then who the hell are you? And what do you represent? We only have two parties. This guy say he's a Democrat. What are you? And these people who call themselves quote unquote centrists at this point just basically don't exist. And they were, or they are, what they always were. Radicals, whereas the public was taking a certain disposition that was somewhat different from them. And the public gets stuck into voting for something, not because it's something that what they want, but only because it's what they think they have as available. Let me end it here. Like, share, and subscribe.